first time in my life, perhaps, I'm in a building where I'm not the only black conservative. Isn't that refreshing? So I want to thank Charlie Kirk, Candace, the leadership of Turning Point, for having the vision of putting this together and being committed to it for a second year. I thank them for that. And thank you, Charlie, if you're here, for inviting me. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for being here. You know, several years ago, I was invited to a friend's home to watch the Super Bowl. At that event, 18 to 20 black African Americans were there. All of them were Democrats. During the course of conversation that night, the subject of politics came up. When I shared with them that I was a conservative, the attacks began. One after another, they called me everything but a child of God. Sellout, foot shuffler, house N-word. I went home that night thinking and mostly praying about how can I create an atmosphere for political dialogue without the fear of racist name calling. You ever heard the phrase that necessity is the mother of invention? Well, through necessity of being tired of being called a sellout, and after years or months of research, I created something called the Frederick Douglass Republican Engagement Strategy. A year later, I invited those same black Democrats to my home to watch the Super Bowl. Reluctantly, they all came. And of course, that night, the subject of politics came up. They said, oh, okay, Carl's a conservative. I said, wait a minute. I'm more than a conservative. I'm more than a Republican. I'm a Frederick Douglass Republican. And I believe in the life-empowering values of Frederick Douglass. Respect for the Constitution. Respect for life. I believe in the limited power of government. I believe in personal responsibility, free speech, religious liberty, school choice. When I shared that with them, all of them started talking about how they were a Frederick Douglass Republican too. When the last person left my home that night, I closed the door and I started pumping my fist. I said, yeah, it works. Doggone it. For the first time in my life, I had the confidence, the knowledge, and the skill to win the narrative and win them. Boy, I was so empowered. I was so empowered. I felt faster than a speeding bullet. I was more powerful than a locomotive. I was able to leap tall buildings with a single bound. Look, up in the sky, it's a bird, it's a plane. No, it's super conservative. You got to get your head up. Yes, sir. Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass. If we are serious, let me get myself back together here. Y'all so funny. If we are serious about defending liberty, if we are serious about defending the Constitution, we must make Frederick Douglass an integral part of our message. If not, it's over with. It's over with. Last November, in the third hour of his talk show, Rush Limbaugh made a comment. He said, the left have masterfully demonized that word conservative. That before we speak, we've already been discredited. Yeah. And he said, I've been searching for 30 years for an answer. We need to call Rush and tell him we got one. The answer is Frederick Douglass. Let me break it down how this strategy works. Let me expound on my testimony. The phrase Frederick Douglass is an oxymoron for a lot of people. Frederick Douglass is an icon of liberty. Republican, because we're losing a propaganda battle, icon of racism. Liberty, racism, they don't go together. So when you say, English is my second language today, so be patient with me. When you share someone that you're a Frederick Douglass Republican, that phrase creates a mystery in their mind, and they will know what you're talking about. That's when you seize control of the narrative. Frederick Douglass. Let me give you a quick refresher on Frederick Douglass. Born 1818 in the Eastern Shores area of Maryland. The way I like to put it, Frederick Douglass was born below poverty. See, when you're born into slavery, you're born below poverty. Never wore a pair of shoes until he was 8 years old, never slept in bed to age 10. He was homeschooled, self-taught. 0 days of formal schooling. Let's fast forward a little bit. At the age of 20, in 1838, he escaped from slavery on his second attempt. Frederick Douglass wrote 3 autobiographies, and he wrote a novel called The Heroic Slave, Frederick Douglass, he was an advisor to 5 Republican presidents. Let's go through them right quickly. Abraham Lincoln, Ulysses S. Grant, James Garfield, Rutherford Hayes, Benjamin Harrison. Unlike yourself, most folks don't get a chance to meet one president. Douglass was advisor 5. Trivia question for you. At the 1895, at the age of 77, Frederick Douglass passed away of a massive heart attack. How much money in savings do you think Frederick Douglass had at the time of his death? How much? Want me to tell you? He had $300,000 in savings. That's back then. Today, that's more than $11 million. When I read that blew my mind. Good gosh. What was his action plan for success? Because success is not a secret, success is a system. Frederick Douglass. So you can see that the life of Frederick Douglass is inspiring. What I like about Frederick Douglass, it doesn't matter which victim category that the left try to put people in. Nobody today can out-victimize Frederick Douglass. His life is empowering. It's inspirational. The writings of Frederick Douglass, this is what gives us the leverage as conservatives to control, win the narrative. Let me make a provocative statement here. The thoughts, what Frederick Douglass had to say about liberty and the Constitution, what he had to say is more important what any of the founding fathers had to say. Whew. That's heresy, K. Carl. That's blasphemy. K. Carl, how could you say such a thing? Let me prove my point. The founders gave us 2 magnificent documents, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Now, some of the founders owned slaves. When the Constitution was ratified, that's not when they freed their slaves. In many cases, the slaves were freed after the death of the founders. So when it comes to liberty, the founders are tainted, and the left exploits that. These racist men who own slaves gave us this racist document called the Constitution, don't they? Yeah. On the other hand, Frederick Douglass did not own any slaves. He was a slave. And in his writings and in his speeches, he affirmed the founders and he affirmed the Constitution, and the left has no answer for that. And they never will. For example, regarding the Constitution, Frederick Douglass said, the Constitution reads, "We the people." It does not read, "We the white people." This is Douglass now. Douglass went on to say, if black folks are considered to be people, then they should be benefactors of the Constitution. Douglass concluded by saying, the problem is not with the Constitution, the problem is the application of the Constitution. The problem is not with the Bible, the problem is how the Bible is applied. So thank God we have a literary legacy of Frederick Douglass to refute the lies and the false rhetoric of the left. Can you imagine young people like you who know how to leverage the life and the writings of Frederick Douglass to win the narrative and trump the race card, pun intended? The answer is Frederick Douglass. I feel like I've won the lottery. Out of 350 million people in the United States, God has given me this message to share with you. Because I want you to sense the same sense of empowerment I had that night and everywhere I walk when I go out and speak. We got to leverage Frederick Douglass. As a conservative, you're going to find out that you are unwelcome on high school and college campuses. You're going to find out that your teachers and professors and administrators will vilify you. And leftist students will assault you physically. But you got to be empowered. You got to try, right? You're right. Let them try. We can't back down. We have to be empowered and equipped on how to deal with the racist name calling of the left and how to defend our conservative viewpoint. Leverage Frederick Douglass. Now, let me stop here and say that a Frederick Douglass is not based on a Frederick Douglass Republican, it's not based on your skin color. A Frederick Douglass Republican is a person who embraces what we call the life-empowering values of Frederick Douglass. It's not about color, it's about values. What are some of those values? I've mentioned it before. Respect for the U.S. Constitution, respect for life, the belief of the limited power of government. I like to keep more of the money that I make. The belief in personal responsibility. That comes out of 2 Thessalonians. If a man doesn't work, he shouldn't eat. Free speech. Douglass wrote about these things. He wrote about free speech. He wrote about religious liberty. He wrote about economic prosperity. He wrote about immigration. All the things we're dealing with, Frederick Douglass wrote about it. It's powerful because he writes from a former slave perspective. The left has no answer for it. They never will. Once we get this thing on a national level and grow this national movement of conservatives who can leverage Douglass, you're going to see the left start jumping out of windows at 12 feet. They got to go, or they're going to go back to France, one of the two. Make sense to you? Frederick Douglass. So this whole Frederick Douglass Republican engagement strategy, it's not a black thing, it's a liberty thing. Frederick Douglass, America's greatest liberty messenger. Frederick Douglass, the forgotten prophet. I'm going to say this to you. I'm going to let you go. My time is running down here a little bit. When you go back home and leave here, you got to deal with some pushback. That pushback going to come in terms of social. You may lose some of your relationships. It's okay. Oh, well. It may be economic. You may lose your job. But I'm going to help you here. I'm going to show you how you deal with it. When you go back home, you let them know I've been inspired by the life and writings of Frederick Douglass. I'm more than a conservative and Republican. I'm a Frederick Douglass Republican. And you go through those life-empowering values. That's how you do it. I want to share this with you. Through the ministry of the Apostle Paul, God has given us the blueprint on how to do diversity outreach. When you think about it, the Apostle Paul, he was called and commissioned by God to take the gospel to the Gentiles, people of different ethnicities, different races, if you will. By occupation, the Apostle Paul was an attorney and he was a tent maker. God called the Apostle Paul to establish a big tent. We say it all the time. We got to have a what? A big tent. Big tent is a metaphoric expression for diversity outreach, diversity inclusion. When you go to 1 Corinthians 9:22, the Apostle Paul said, I become all things to all people. When you read some of the other translations, Paul is saying, in terms of the Gentiles, I entered their world and I tried to experience life from their viewpoint. If you went to my world as an African American and you try to experience life from my viewpoint, you're going to quickly discover the word conservative and the name Republican Party, because of propaganda and some missteps of the party, Republican Party, those words have become culturally ingrained in the black community to mean racist. That's what we're dealing with. We got to overcome that. Leverage Frederick Douglass. Also this, through the ministry of the Apostle Paul, God has given us the blueprint, on how to trump the race card. Listen to me. I'm going to break it down for you. Think about this. Before the Apostle Paul became a champion of Christianity, he was also known as the bloodthirsty murderer of Christians. He persecuted them. The Gentiles knew about him, his reputation, right? Then he had his Damascus Road experience. He became a changed man. I can imagine the Gentiles. What kind of gossip was going on around that time? I wasn't there at that time, of course, but allow me to use my biblical imagination. The Gentiles. Here comes that Paul, that no good liar, calling himself a conservative Christian. He's not fooling anybody. He's trying to get us to become Christians so he can kill us too. Wait a minute. So the question is, how did Paul, who was tasked by God to take the message to the Gentiles, overcome the negative perceptions the Gentiles had of him? How did he trump the race card? He did two things. Number one, he had a testimony. Everywhere he went, he talked about how the teachings of Jesus Christ changed his life. He didn't just quote the Christ. He said, I'm a changed man because of the teachings. He had a testimony. We got to have a testimony. Yeah. We got to let people know I've been inspired by the life and writings of Frederick Douglass. I'm more than a conservative Republican. I'm a Frederick Douglass Republican. The second thing he did, he showed good deeds. He was in the community doing positive things. He healed the sick. He ministered to them. He brought one person back from the dead. When you have your testimony and you have deeds, you put them together. That's how he trumped the race card, by his testimony and his deeds. How do we trump the race card? By our testimony and our deeds. The left has no answer for this. So thank God for giving us the ministry of the Apostle Paul and giving us the literary legacy of Frederick Douglass, which the left has no answer for. Make sense to you? Yes. I got time for 2 questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
2 questions? Yes, sir? Are you stretching, right? Go ahead.
My question is,
I have it. Here you go.
I remember you talking about family. Like once you go back home, you're going to receive a lot of pushback.
Yeah.
I have been talking to my family about, coming over to the Republican Party. Like for example, my mom.
Yeah.
She votes Democrat, but she is a pro-gun advocate. She carried the.
I know where you're going. I got like a minute left, so I know where you're going.
Okay.
He said he's been trying to get his mother to become a Republican, and she has these conservative values. Here's what I tell Republicans all across the country. Stop trying to get black folks to become Republicans. Just inspire them to vote their values. Why am I saying this? See, when you become a Republican or take on a conservative tongue and you go back and tell your family about it, you're going to deal with some mess. Some folks not ready for that. They don't know how to leverage Frederick Douglass yet. So inspire them to vote their values. That's what I told my mom. I said, Mom, vote your values. There's a quote from Robert Brown Elliott. He was one of the first 7 Republicans serving U.S. Congress out of South Carolina. Here's his quote. I showed my mom. She got it. He said, I am a slave to principles. I call no party master. I'm a slave to Christian principles. I don't call the Democrat Party or the Republican Party my master. I'm going to vote in a way that shows my love and my allegiance to the God I say I serve. I said, Mother, when you go into that voting booth, don't think God can't see what you're doing. It inspired them to vote their values. Some folks are not ready for that. Go out here and try to get a Lutheran, become a Catholic. And you go back and tell your folks what you did. You got some pushback. Folks are not ready for that until we train them how to guard themselves. And what we got to do as conservatives, we got to learn how to inoculate ourselves against the pushback. I'll be here the rest of the night. Come talk to me. And I'll be here tomorrow. Love you. God bless you.